Hi everyone, let's talk now a little bit about behaviorism. So behavioral therapy originated in around 1913. John B. Watson is the initiator of this movement. You will recall he is the psychologist who did the Little Albert study, a study that's never been replicated, incidentally. It's very famous and very maybe sensational. All the introduction to psychology textbooks love to talk about the famous Little Albert study, how somehow a little baby was conditioned to fear a little white rat by a clanging bar, showing that fears, etc., are learned. And incidentally, behaviorism, although powerful and effective in some cases, is not everything that its supporters have touted it to be in history. For instance, the Little Albert study's never been replicated, and much of the study has had some ethical issues involved with the data that was reported, falsification of data as well. Well, that's good for another class, but for right now, let's focus on what some of the strong points of behaviorism. Behaviorism is used, of course, in our criminal justice system, our prison system. The idea of reform through punishment is a behavioral idea. Many of your academic system, this class you're in right now, is based on behaviorism, the grading system. I'm hoping that I counter this with a bit of humanism from my presentation, but what is behaviorism in an academic setting? Well, you get rewarded for certain behaviors and you get punished for others' behaviors. The A is the reward system for doing the exam on time, etc. So this is all behaviorism based into the educational system. Behaviorism is very effective with low-functioning individuals with cognitive disabilities, so low insight. So in behaviorism, there's not a lot of question on the thought process. There's no question on thought process. It's simply actions and rewards or punishments. So the gold star, or the reward for doing something, or the lack of reward, or the punishment for doing something that's not desirable. It's very effective in individuals with cognitive difficulties. So cognitive dysfunctions used to be called mental retardation. The MR population, it's pre-DSM-5 terminology. Also individuals with Down syndrome or other genetic disorders. Autism is a big behavioral therapy. I often tell the story of a young piano student that I had in the past. And the young boy was nonverbal, severe autism. And he would come to the music lesson, and he was accompanied by his behavioral therapist. And the goal was to have the child enjoy, he's 13 years old, have the child enjoy music, making sounds. So we sat down at the piano, and I did this little thing based on a different type of psychology called scaffolding. And scaffolding is when you work individually with the client, the patient, and you adjust to that individual's needs gradually. It was developed by a fellow named Lev Vygotsky, a Russian psychologist, Lev Vygotsky. And through scaffolding, I would do these little things, like just press the piano key and get the goal to have this child eventually play da 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 da. So I began by just pressing the note, and then the child would look at me, and I was completely, he wasn't verbal, so neither was I. I didn't say anything. I did things. I demonstrated. So I went, bum. And he looked at me, and I'd look at him and I'd smile. A little bit of a reward system. Bump. And he picked up his whole hand and he pressed down on the whole keyboard, and I gave him a big smile. And I nodded. And he did it again, and then I nodded. And then the next time I did it again with my index finger on my right hand on a single note. Bump. And it took him about 20 minutes to replicate exactly what I was doing. Finger on one exact note, say a C, bump, and then him doing that with his right index finger. When he achieved that, the behavioral therapist gave him a little Cookie Crisp. She carried a little bucket of Cookie Crisp cereal. That was his reward. Well, over the course of a few weeks, he was able to play the entire Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with one hand. That is through these reinforcement schedules from the behavioral therapist, giving him a cookie each time he did it right, withholding the cookie when he didn't do it correctly. Now that's very fascinating. This is an example of behavioral therapy, and he was able to play the Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star melody with one finger on the piano. That's behaviorism. It can be very effective for producing the behavior. Now, what I was most fascinated about, because I'm not a behaviorist, I'm a psychodynamic, existential, phenomenological, humanist psychologist, Buddhist psychologist. And what I was fascinated in was his reaction to me playing the piano. You see, this young man, the nonverbal young man, would express joy by repeatedly shaking his hands very rapidly back and forth or hugging me. That's how he expressed his joy, nonverbally. And he loved to listen to the piano. So he would sit next to me on a chair next to me, and I'd be at the piano. And I would play piece or improvise music for him. Just make this music and create a world, an atmosphere of music. Like, in other words, this world out here ceased to exist, and this musically conjured up world existed for us. And when I would stop playing, he would take his hands and place them on top of my hands, because he knew that once I lifted my hands off the piano keyboard, the sound stopped. And he wanted that sound to continue until he could no longer hear it. And he'd wait, and he'd keep his hands on my hands, not letting me lift my hands off the keyboard. Gently. He was very, very sensitive. And when the sound stopped, he lifted and he expressed his joy through shaking his hands and hugging me. That was a remarkable, remarkable experience. So we see here a little contrast between behaviorism, which would be producing some sort of result of skill. In other words, he being able to play the piano, play a short little melody on the piano with one finger through a series of reinforcements, of Cookie Crisp reinforcements. And we also saw something that was more humanistic. His ability, or our ability, to connect on a human level without expectation of result. In other words, two people sitting down at a piano and just enjoying the music that's being made. One person making the music, the other person hearing the music, experiencing the music, both essential to one another. This is a contrast between, say, behaviorism and humanism. Behaviorism is going to be interested in result. So, for example, the humanist therapist meets with a parent and a child, and the parent is complaining because the child is not doing well in school. And the goal is to get good grades, do well in school. Why do we want to do well in school? Well, I guess that means then people respect us, we are educated, we get a better job, all these other things. So that's why it's important for people when they're putting emphasis on school performance. So most of the school performance issues I know come from, especially in children, come from a problem of immediate gratification, the payoff being now. A small payoff now, the bigger payoff is too far in the distance. So the little child comes into the office and we begin to hopefully shape the child's behavior into viewing the payoff in a long-term, a bigger long-term payoff than a short, instantaneous payoff. So this is a form of behavioral therapy. So you are able to get right now one marshmallow. Or if you wait for a half hour, you get 5 marshmallows. A little gradual showing. This is the key to academic success, incidentally. Being able to wait to party 5-10 years from now. It's the same with financial success. This idea of being able to forestall instantaneous gratification. I hear people talk about becoming a millionaire, and they talk about it as if it's something they'll never attain. I'll never be a millionaire. How could anybody ever be a millionaire? Let alone a few $100,000 even. For many people, most people in our culture, that's a baffling idea. It's not that difficult. It's very easy to become a millionaire, especially for those of you who are in your 20s. If right now you're in your 20s and you commit to, regardless of your circumstances, making it the priority to put 10% of your paycheck away right now. Every paycheck you get, I don't know what you make, $100 a week, $10 a week, it's 10%. And you put that away and you put it in something that cultivates compound interest. In 20 years, by the time you're my age, your 40s, you will easily have hundreds, if not $1 million in your account. But you see, it's not about how much you make. It's about starting early, time. Seeing at 20 years old and saying, oh, at 40, who could think of 40? But the individuals who say, if I put a little bit aside here, now, in a long picture, you're going to one day be 40-some years old and say, oh my goodness, where did all this money come from? And then when you hear people saying, how is it possible people become millionaires? You're going to say to yourself, well, you know the secret of how it's done. One way it's done. It's not a big, quick payoff. It's planning ahead. It's forestalling instantaneous gratification. In other words, holy moly, how am I going to spare this $10 when I can't even pay for the things that I need right now for whatever reason? It's being able to make that sacrifice and forestall that for a later, greater interest. The same thing is exactly true in academic work. It's forestalling instantaneous gratification for the payoff that's going to come 4 years from now. When you all graduate, I'm going to study now. I'm going to really soak this stuff up and learn it. And I'm going to have a nice time. Go, maybe a couple times a month, go and enjoy yourself at the party or whatever it is you do for fun, concerts, whatever. But if you have tests and exams and papers, focus on that now, because in 4 or 5 years after you get your degree, in the long run, the payoff's going to be so much greater. You'll wake up one day and be able to do whatever you want all day long. Every day's a party, simply because you forestalled that instantaneous gratification. This is an aspect of behaviorism that admittedly is I'm infusing with humanism and human potential. I would say it's my take on behaviorism. If I were a behaviorist, this is the way I would do it. So in fairness, the focus is on reward and punishment, and in current forms of behaviorism, cognitive behaviorism, we focus on short-term versus long-term payoffs, things of that nature. But this is one of, I tell you this because it's so important. You read the facts about behaviorism in your textbook. What I'm offering you here something is how you incorporate this into your life. And just think of this. We've given an example of financial, quote-unquote, success. Educational success. Who does well in school and then eventually goes to graduate school? The individuals who are able to focus on sustained forestalling of the payoff. In other words, sacrifice now for a bigger payoff later in your grades, in your schoolwork, in finances. This is really, I believe, this is, if you want to talk about success in academics, success in finances, how about dieting? How about dieting? This is another great example. For those who are not dealing with some sort of genetic or biological situation for obesity or being out of shape. This is another example of forestalling instantaneous gratification, reward, being able to focus on a long-term reward. What does this mean? Well, this means that you commit yourself every day to, an hour of exercise. Go to the gym, take a walk, being active every day. You do something that burns 500 calories a day. That could be taking a walk for an hour and a half or 2 hours, or going for a jog, a mild, low-impact jog for an hour every other day. That alone won't do it for most people. That alone won't get the weight off. You have to also do the other hard thing, get the appetite under control. Somehow realize that in addition to the physical exercise, one has to cut the calories that they're eating every day. And boy, anyone who's ever tried dieting knows how difficult it is. It's as difficult as getting that A. It's as difficult as saving the hundreds of thousands of dollars and $1 million in 20 years. It's time is the essential factor. You have to remain committed to time. And many of us, when we get into the idea of the goal, I'm going to lose the weight. I'm going to lose 20 pounds, let's say. And we've worked really hard for 2 days, and the amount of effort that goes into it hurts because we're hungry. And we get grumpy, especially in the beginning, because we're used to a certain intake of sugar intake or a certain carbohydrate intake or a certain amount of calories. And suddenly we're eating maybe a quarter or less than what our normal daily caloric intake is. And we suffer through this for a week, and we look down at the scale and we see nothing happening for a week. Oh man, I just dieted and exercised for 7 days and there's no shift on the scale. And then maybe after 2 weeks it drops down a little bit, a pound or two. And you say to yourself, is this worth all this suffering? Is this worth all this suffering? And the fascinating key is this: if you look at it just in an individual week or pound by pound, no way is it worth it. However, time, if you stick to it for 3 months, and that 20 pounds, that 1 pound a week suddenly drops down to your 20-pound goal. See, it's long term. It's looking ahead, saying, well, this might not be worth it, but what's going to come is going to be worth it for health, for how one feels about themselves, etc. So here we have another example. We had a first example on financial success, how to cultivate behaviorism in the financial success, how to cultivate behaviorism into academic success, and how to cultivate this behaviorism into physical health through dieting. And all three are contingent on time. All three are contingent on time. Doing little by little the self-discipline it takes for forestalling instantaneous gratification, suffering a little now for a greater payoff in the end. Well, that's the way I present behaviorism. And admittedly, I might be putting a little more flesh on the bones than is actually there, but it's effective. I'll conclude this, now that we're coming up on 20-minute mark, I'll conclude this by offering you one other thought. Changing the behavior of addiction, individuals with an addiction, alcoholism or drug use or cigarette smoking, behaviorism, very effective for this. And you can use behavioral therapy strategies for changing one's behavior for these addictive drugs. It's another very effective treatment for this. So if you go into drug rehab counseling, behaviorism is going to be a central approach in theory for that. Okay, so here a little bit of thoughts for you about behaviorism. And again, maybe a little more fleshed out than what you'd get from most behaviorists, but you'll have to accept that I'm a humanist teaching behaviorism. So I hope that you got something out of this.